Dr. Ta-Woo Kim huddled against the biting wind as he adjusted his sample collector. The remote research station's lights barely visible through the swirling snow. He had been studying unusual atmospheric anomalies in this isolated mountain range for 3 years now, with only occasional supply drops to connect him to the outside world. Just one more reading, he muttered to himself, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Science had always been his refuge, the one constant companion in a life marked by solitude. The sky suddenly lit up with a streak of blue-green light. Tai-Woo looked up just in time to see what appeared to be a small craft plummeting toward the mountains about 2 kilometers away. The impact shook the ground beneath his feet. His scientific curiosity immediately overwhelmed any sense of caution. He grabbed his emergency pack and set off toward the crash site, following the faint glow now visible against the dark mountainside. After an hour of difficult hiking, Ta-Woo reached a small crater where twisted metal steamed against the snow. The craft was unlike anything he had ever seen. No wings, no obvious propulsion system, just smooth curves that seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. A section of the hull had split open. Tai-Woo approached carefully, his heart pounding in his chest. A soft groan from inside made him rush forward. Inside the craft, he found her. At first glance, she looked almost human, but no human had skin that faintly glowed with an inner light or eyes that shifted from violet to deep blue as they fixed on him. Her features were delicate, perfect in their symmetry. "Help," she whispered in perfect English, though her lips seemed to move strangely around the word. Tai-Woo snapped out of his shock and checked her for injuries. A deep cut ran along her arm, leaking the silvery fluid that sparkled in the dim light. "I'm a doctor, well, a scientist," he said as he applied pressure to the wound. "I need to get you back to my station." The journey back was slow and difficult. The woman, if that's what she was, drifted in and out of consciousness. When they finally reached the research station, Ta-Woo gently laid her on his bed and properly cleaned and bandaged her wound. As the sun rose, she finally opened her eyes fully. They had settled into a calm, deep purple. "Thank you," she said, her voice musical and strange. "My name is Hana. I'm Dr. Ta-Woo Kim. You're not from Earth, are you?" Hana smiled slightly. "No. I come from a world circling a star you call Proxima Centauri. My people are the Novan." Over the next few days, as Hana recovered, Ta-Woo learned more about her. The Novans were an ancient race that had mastered interstellar travel thousands of years ago. Her ship had malfunctioned while she was on a scientific mission studying Earth's upper atmosphere. "My people will send a rescue signal soon," she explained one evening as they shared a meal. "Our communication systems work differently from yours. It may take several weeks." Tai-Woo found himself strangely comfortable with Hana. After years of isolation, conversation should have felt awkward, but something about her put him at ease. She asked endless questions about human emotions, relationships, and resilience. "Your species feels so deeply, yet survives so much pain," she said, her eyes shifting to a curious gold color. "It's remarkable." 2 weeks after her arrival, as they sat watching the northern lights dance across the sky through the station's observation dome, Hana grew quiet. "There's something I must tell you, Ta-Woo," she said finally. "My mission here wasn't purely scientific. My people are dying." Her eyes dimmed to a somber blue as she explained. The Novan race was facing extinction due to genetic degradation after millions of years of evolution. Their scientists had discovered that human DNA contained specific resilience factors their species desperately needed. "But there's a problem," she continued. "The genetic compatibility between our species will only be possible in 1,000 years, when specific cosmic radiation patterns align perfectly." Ta-Woo stared at her, trying to process her words. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because we have mastered cryogenic suspension," Hana said, her eyes now a hopeful green. "We can preserve a human perfectly, without aging, until the time is right." Their eyes met across the small table. The implication hung in the air between them. You want me to go with you? To leave Earth behind for 1,000 years? Tawu asked. I would never force such a choice, Hannah replied softly. But yes, that is what I'm asking. Your genetic structure is remarkably ideal for what we need. Tawu looked out at the lonely research station that had been his home. He thought about the life he had left behind. Parents long gone, relationships that had faded, a world that barely knew he existed. The rescue ship will arrive in 3 days, Hannah said, touching his hand gently. Her skin was warm, almost humming with energy. You have time to decide. As the first light of dawn broke over the mountains, Tawu realized he had not slept. Instead, he had spent the night looking at old photos of Earth on his tablet, wondering if this was truly the end of his human journey, or the beginning of something far greater. The 3 days before the arrival of Hannah's rescue ship passed in a blur of deep conversations and quiet contemplation. Tawu found himself drawn to the alien woman in ways he couldn't fully understand. They spent hours talking about their worlds, their sciences, and their lives. Do you have family waiting for you? Tawu asked one evening as they shared a simple meal of his dwindling supplies. Hannah's eyes shifted to a soft amber color that he had come to recognize as nostalgia. We don't have family units as humans do. The Novan bond differently. We form connections based on intellectual and emotional resonance rather than biological ties. That sounds lonely, Tawu said. Perhaps by human standards. But I've never known anything different. She paused, studying his face. Do you have family on Earth? Tawu shook his head. My parents died years ago. No siblings. A few distant cousins I haven't spoken to in decades. He stirred his food absently. Science became my family, I suppose. On the second day, Hannah showed him something remarkable. From a hidden compartment in her partially repaired ship, she retrieved a small crystal-like device. This contains visual records of my world, she explained, placing it on the table between them. When activated, the crystal projected a holographic display more real and vivid than any technology Tawu had ever seen. He gasped as the walls of his research station seemed to melt away, replaced by the landscape of Novus. Towering crystal spires caught the light of twin suns, scattering rainbows across vast gardens where plants moved with apparent intelligence. Novan people, similar to Hannah, but with subtle differences in the patterns of their luminescent skin, moved through the city with graceful purpose. It's beautiful, Tawu whispered, reaching out to touch a flower that seemed to react to his presence. This is only a small part of our world, Hannah said, her eyes glowing with pride. We have entire continents dedicated to natural preservation, underwater cities, and orbital habitats. A hologram shifted to show a vast library with data crystals stretching endlessly in all directions. This is where I spent most of my time before becoming a field researcher. All the knowledge of our civilization is stored here. Tawu's scientist heart raced at the thought of such knowledge. How old is your civilization? We have continuous records dating back nearly 2 million of your Earth years, Hannah replied casually. On the morning of the third day, Tawu woke early and climbed to a ridge near the station. The sun was just rising, painting the snow-covered mountains in pink and gold. Earth had such beauty, he thought. Would he really leave it all behind? He heard soft footsteps in the snow and knew without turning that Hannah had joined him. My ship will arrive today, she said quietly. I have not asked for your decision, because I know how difficult this choice must be. Tawu watched an eagle soar through the valley below. Will I ever see Earth again? I cannot promise that, Hannah answered honestly. 1,000 years is a long time, even for my people. The future is uncertain. They stood in silence, watching the sunrise together. If I say no, Tawu finally asked, will your people find someone else? Hannah's eyes dimmed to a gray-blue. We will try, but the genetic compatibility we seek is rare. Without intervention, my species will likely face extinction within the next 10,000 years. Back at the station, Ta Wu packed a small bag of personal items, photos, his father's watch, a book of poetry his mother had loved. Such small things to represent a human life. At midday, the sky darkened as a large ship, similar in design to Hannah's craft, but much larger, descended silently through the clouds. It hovered above the research station, casting an oval shadow over the snow. "They're here," Hannah said simply. A beam of light extended from the ship to the ground, and two figures materialized before them. They resembled Hannah, though their skin patterns glowed in different arrangements. They spoke to Hannah in a musical language full of tones Ta Wu could barely distinguish. After a brief conversation, Hannah turned to him. "It is time to decide, Ta Wu. Will you come with us?" Ta Wu looked back at his research station, the small, isolated place that had been his home and his prison for years. He thought about Earth, with its beauty and its pain, its history and its uncertain future. He thought about returning to his empty apartment in Seoul, to conferences where colleagues respected his work but knew nothing of him as a person. Then he looked at Hannah, her eyes now a hopeful, shimmering violet. "I'll come," he said finally, "but I need to understand everything about the process. What happens to me during those 1,000 years?" Relief washed over Hannah's face, her skin brightening visibly. "You will sleep without dreaming. For you, it will be like closing your eyes one moment and opening them the next." As they boarded the ship through the beam of light, Ta Wu took one last look at Earth spread out below him, the mountains, the forests, the distant glimmer of ocean. His heart pounded with fear and excitement. The cryogenic chamber awaited him in the ship's medical bay. It looked surprisingly simple, a transparent pod lined with a soft, pulsing material. "Are you certain?" Hannah asked, her hand hovering over the activation control. Ta Wu took a deep breath and nodded. 1,000 years. Just don't forget to wake me up." Hannah's eyes shifted to a deep, sincere blue. "I will be there when you awaken. This I promise." As the chamber closed around him and a cool mist filled his lungs, Ta Wu's last sight was Hannah's face, watching over him with her ever-changing eyes. Ta Wu's consciousness returned slowly, like scattered puzzle pieces finding their way back together. First came sensation, warmth flowing through his limbs, a gentle humming in his ears. Then memory, the research station, the crashed ship, Hannah with her color-shifting eyes. The choice he had made. His eyes opened to a ceiling that seemed alive with soft, pulsing light. Not the metal of a spacecraft, but something organic, almost breathing. "He's awake," a melodic voice said nearby. Ta Wu turned his head to see a Novan he didn't recognize, skin patterns glowing in shades of green and blue. And then, stepping forward from behind this stranger, was a familiar figure. "Hannah," he whispered, his voice rough from disuse. She looked exactly as he remembered, luminescent skin, delicate features, and those remarkable eyes, currently shifting between purple and gold with obvious emotion. "Welcome to Novus, Ta Wu," she said, taking his hand. Her touch felt the same, that strange humming energy beneath warm skin. "You've been asleep for 1,000 years." The reality of those words hit him with unexpected force. Everyone he had ever known on Earth was long dead. Civilizations could have risen and fallen. Nothing remained of his former life except his memories. Over the next few days, as his body adjusted to being awake again, Ta Wu learned more about his new home. The medical facility where he had awakened was in the heart of Shiren, the capital city of Novus. His room overlooked a vast cityscape that matched the holographic images Hannah had shown him, but no recording could capture the true scale and beauty of the crystal towers that seemed to grow rather than be built, or the way light moved through them in complex, ever-changing patterns. "Our structures are semi-sentient," Hannah explained as she guided him through the city streets. "They respond to their surroundings and the needs of their inhabitants." Novans moved aside respectfully as they walked, their curious eyes following Ta Wu. Some nodded in greeting. Others simply stared. "They've been waiting for your arrival for generations," Hannah said, noticing his discomfort at the attention. Many Novans today have dedicated their lives to preparing for the genetic integration project. That evening, in a private garden that reminded Tawu of an earth rainforest crossed with a coral reef, he finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind. Why did you wait for me? 1,000 years, Hannah. You could have found someone else. Hannah's eyes darkened to a thoughtful blue. Time moves differently for my people. We live for many thousands of your Earth years. A millennium is significant, but not as it would be for humans. She paused, touching a flower that curled around her finger in response. And there is something else you should know. She explained that during his cryogenic sleep, Novan scientists had studied his DNA extensively. What they discovered was more complex than they had initially believed. The genetic solution for their degradation wasn't just about extracting and replicating his DNA. It required actual offspring between human and Novan. You mean? Tawu began, struggling to process the implications. A true genetic merging, Hannah confirmed. Children who would carry both lineages. Tawu stood and walked to the edge of the garden, where an opening in the living wall revealed the city stretching below them, glittering in the light of twin setting suns. Was that always the plan? He asked, not looking at her. When you found me on Earth, was I just breeding stock? Hannah moved beside him, her skin dimming with distress. No. Initially, we believed samples would be sufficient. The discovery came later, while you slept. Would you have told me the full truth if you had known? Tawu asked. I hope I would have, she said quietly. But I cannot claim perfect honesty when I have lived 1,000 years since making that choice. The next day, Tawu was introduced to the Council of Elders, 7 ancient Novans whose skin barely glowed anymore, their patterns faded with extreme age. They spoke formally, welcoming him to their world and explaining the importance of his presence. One elder, named Jun, spoke with surprising warmth. We have prepared a space for you that resembles your Earth environments. Perhaps it will help you adjust. This Earth space turned out to be an entire biodome, filled with plants and animals from his home planet, trees, flowers, even birds that fluttered among the branches. At its center stood a small house built in the style of traditional Korean architecture. How is this possible? Tawu asked, watching a butterfly land on a flower that shouldn't exist on this alien world. We've maintained genetic samples of Earth species for scientific study, Hannah explained. This space was created 50 years ago in preparation for your awakening. That night, alone in the Earth house, Tawu stared up at an artificial sky programmed to show Earth constellations. His mind swirled with conflicting emotions, wonder at this new world, grief for all he had left behind, and a growing uneasiness about his true purpose here. He picked up a small stone from beside a stream running through the garden and held it tightly. 1,000 years, he whispered to himself. And what am I now? A savior, a specimen, a potential father to a new species. Outside his window, the real skies of Novus shimmered with colors no human eyes had ever seen before his. A new world waited for him, beautiful, alien, and filled with complicated truths he was only beginning to understand. Tawu had been on Novus for 3 months when he began to notice something strange about the Novans. Despite their incredible technology and extended lifespans, they seemed to lack something essential that humans possessed. He first noticed it during a celebration marking the changing of seasons. The event was perfectly organized. Beautiful music played from invisible sources, food was artfully presented, and the decorations were stunning. Yet no one showed real excitement. Novans moved through the celebration with polite interest, but without joy or spontaneity. Don't people ever just let go? Tawu asked Hannah as they watched a precisely choreographed dance performance. What do you mean? Her eyes shifted to a curious light blue. Laugh until they cry, dance without knowing the steps, make mistakes and find them funny. Hannah considered this. Living for thousands of years changes how one experiences emotions. Strong feelings become inefficient when time stretches so long. This conversation sparked something in Tawu. In the following weeks, he began inviting younger Novans to his Earth habitat. At first, just a few came out of scientific curiosity. Soon, a regular group of 12 formed, fascinated by his stories of human life. "You mean humans will risk their lives just to climb a mountain, with no purpose other than the experience?" asked Minja, a young Novan scientist with bright copper patterns swirling on his skin. "Exactly," Tawu confirmed. "And the feeling when you reach the top, the pride, the awe, it's worth every hardship." He taught them Earth games that required physical touch, shared emotional music from his memories, and encouraged them to try activities without planning every detail first. Slowly, the young Novans began to change, laughing more freely, expressing opinions more boldly, even disagreeing with each other in ways that would have been considered impolite in Novan society. One evening, Tawu found Hannah waiting for him outside his habitat. Her eyes were a troubled gray-green. "The Council of Elders has concerns about your gatherings," she said directly. "They worry you're introducing instability into our society." "Instability? I'm teaching them to feel," Tawu replied. "To take risks, to be spontaneous. Those qualities faded from our species for a reason," Hannah explained. "Emotional extremes led to conflicts. Impulsive decisions caused disasters. Over millennia, we evolved toward balance and caution, and lost something precious in the process," Tawu argued. "Without emotional depth, what's the point of living so long? You're just existing." The conversation ended unresolved, but Tawu noticed more Novan observers at his next gathering. This didn't stop him. He introduced his young followers to the concept of friendly competition, organizing simple races and games of strategy where winning mattered less than the experience of playing. One day, Minji brought a musical instrument, a curved, crystal-like object that produced tones based on the player's touch and emotional state. "I want to create music like in your Earth stories," he explained. "Music that makes people feel something strong." The young Novan played a halting melody, clearly struggling with the unfamiliar concept of emotional expression. Tawu sat beside him and began telling a story of loss, his parents' death, the loneliness of his research station, leaving Earth behind forever. As he spoke, Minji's playing changed, becoming sorrowful and deep. The other young Novans watched in silence, many with their eyes shifting to dark blues and purples for the first time. When the music ended, one of them was crying, actual tears rolling down her luminescent cheeks. This was unprecedented. Novans rarely produced tears. News of this event spread quickly through the city. That night, Hannah came to Tawu's habitat looking distressed. "The council demands you stop these gatherings immediately," she said. "Some believe you should be returned to cryogenic sleep until we can extract the needed genetic material without your influence." Tawu felt a cold fear grip him. "They would freeze me again, against my will." "Some would," Hannah admitted, her eyes now a conflicted mixture of colors. "But others, including myself, have been fighting for you. That's what I came to tell you." She sat beside him on a bench overlooking the artificial Earth lake. "When your suspension pod arrived 1,000 years ago, there was a faction that wanted to simply take genetic samples while you slept. They argued it was more efficient than awakening you, teaching you our language, integrating you into our society." "Why didn't they?" Tawu asked quietly. "Because I wouldn't allow it," Hannah said. Her skin brightened with intensity. "I argued that the genetic solution would work better with a conscious participant, but truthfully, I couldn't bear the thought of using you that way, as just a resource to be harvested." Tawu studied her face, seeing new complexity in her changing eyes. "Why? You barely knew me." "Because in those few days on Earth, you showed me something I had never experienced among my own people, genuine caring without calculation. You helped me without knowing what I was or what advantage it might bring you." Her hand found his. "I've been watching over your sleeping form for 1,000 years, wondering if I made the right choice to bring you here." The revelation struck Towu deeply. All this time, he had questioned Hannah's motives, wondering if she saw him as merely a solution to her species' problem. Now he understood she had been his advocate when he couldn't speak for himself. "What happens now?" he asked. "The council meets tomorrow to decide your fate," Hannah replied. "But they don't yet understand what you've begun here." Around them, the artificial Earth night was falling, stars appearing in the programmed sky. Beyond the habitat dome, the real lights of Novus shimmered, a civilization at a crossroads, facing not just genetic extinction, but the possibility of emotional rebirth. The council chamber was silent as Towu entered alongside Hannah. 7 ancient Novans sat in a semicircle, their faded skin patterns barely glowing anymore. Behind them stood several younger council members, including Seho, a stern-faced scientist who had openly opposed Tawu's cultural influence. "We have come to a decision regarding the human," announced Elder June, the most sympathetic of the group. "The genetic integration program will proceed, but under stricter controls. The humans' interactions with our youth will be limited and supervised." Before Tawu could respond, the chamber doors burst open. Minja entered, followed by the group of young Novans who had been attending Tawu's gatherings. "We demand to be heard," Minja said, his copper skin patterns flashing with unusual intensity. "This decision affects our future too." The elder's eyes shifted to colors of surprise and disapproval, but they allowed Minja to speak. He described how Tawu had shown them a different way of experiencing life, with passion, creativity, and emotional depth. "Our society has lost these qualities over millennia," Minji argued. "We live longer but feel less. Is that truly evolution, or is it decline?" The debate that followed was unlike anything in recent Novan history, heated, emotional, and unpredictable. Some elders were clearly disturbed by this display, while others listened with growing interest. As the arguments continued, Seho slipped away unnoticed. Only Tawu saw him leave, a worrying determination in his eyes. Later that night, as Tawu and Hana walked back to his Earth habitat, they were ambushed. A beam of energy struck Hana directly, sending her crumpling to the ground. Tawu turned to see Seho and 3 other Novans approaching, holding weapons. "The human experiment ends now," Seho declared. "You're contaminating our species with primitive emotional responses. We'll extract what we need from you and return you to suspension." Tawu knelt beside Hana, whose skin was dimming alarmingly. "She needs medical help," he shouted. "She chose her side," Seho replied coldly. Suddenly, Minje and several other young Novans emerged from nearby buildings. They had been following at a distance, concerned about threats exactly like this. "Stop this, Seho," Minja commanded. "This isn't our way." "Our way is dying," Seho responded, "with or without human DNA." The standoff was interrupted by the wail of alarm systems. Both groups looked up to see the central medical facility's lights pulsing in emergency patterns. "Something's wrong with the genetic archives," one of Minji's companions said, reading a message on a device at her wrist. Tawu looked down at Hana, her breathing shallow. "Help me get her to the medical center," he urged. "Whatever's happening, they'll have equipment there to help her." Inside the medical center, chaos reigned. Technicians rushed through corridors as alert tones sounded. Minjae used his research clearance to get them into a treatment room, where Tawu gently placed Hana on an examination platform. "The weapon Seho used disrupted her cellular energy patterns," explained a medical technician. "We can stabilize her, but recovery will take time."